Welcome to English Podcast 2.0, the easiest way to learn English on the go.
Okay, so learning English, it can sometimes feel a little bit like you're standing at the base of this massive mountain, right? And when it comes to actually speaking, opening your mouth and letting those words actually come out, that can feel like the steepest part of the whole climb.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I mean, if you've ever felt that little flutter of nerves or just that split second of hesitation, you're definitely not the only one. It's something that so many people who are learning English go through.
For sure. That feeling is incredibly common. And, it makes sense. You're kind of pushing yourself outside of that comfort zone.
Yeah.
Trying to do something new. And it's completely natural to feel a little bit of apprehension, when you're doing that.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're going to really unpack today. We're going to look at how to basically just tackle that fear straight on and start to build real confidence when you speak English.
Okay.
Think of it kind of like a personal strategy session, like how to move past just thinking about speaking and to actually doing it comfortably.
Yeah, I like that. So today what we really want to do is equip you with some really solid tools and insights. We're going to look at kind of the reasons why this fear pops up in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
We'll also sort of clear away some of the doubts that might be holding you back. And then give you concrete steps, actual things you could do, and even exercises that you can start using right away to feel more confident when you're speaking.
Love it.
Yeah.
So have you ever felt like that fear is kind of like this invisible wall that's keeping you from truly expressing yourself in English?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're going to smash through that wall today.
We're going to bring that wall down.
We're going to bring that wall down. Exactly. And by the time we're finished, we'll even share a really simple but powerful confidence-boosting exercise that I think could be a real game changer for you. So stick around for that. Okay, let's really get into this. What are some of the main reasons why so many of us feel that little bit of fear when we're about to speak English?
I think one of the primary ones is the fear of making mistakes.
Yeah.
There's that worry that, what if I mess up? Or what if people don't understand me? What if they laugh? And that fear in itself can just be a huge roadblock and stop people from speaking altogether.
It's so real. I think we can all relate to that feeling of not wanting to mess up no matter what we're doing.
Yeah.
But here's something really important to remember. Even people who've been speaking English their whole lives, they make mistakes all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
Think about it. Native speakers, they stumble over their words, they use the wrong grammar sometimes. It just happens naturally in conversation.
Right.
So the key difference is not that they don't make mistakes, it's that they're generally more comfortable just continuing to speak, even if they do slip up.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Mistakes, they're not a sign of failure, but they're actually a really vital part of learning anything.
Mm-hmm.
They're how we figure out where we need to get better, where we can improve and deepen our understanding. Think about learning any new skill, right? Like if you're learning to cook, you're probably going to burn a few things in the beginning, but each time you do, you kind of figure something out about the heat levels or the timing or whatever it is. And learning a language is really similar.
That's such a good way to look at it. Now, another big one that comes up a lot is the fear of being judged. That worry that if our English isn't perfect, people might, think less of us or that we might sound unintelligent.
Yes. I mean, that's such a natural worry. I think when you're speaking in another language, it kind of feels like you're putting yourself out there a little bit, kind of exposing those vulnerabilities. Yeah. But if we really think about it, the reality is usually quite different from what we're afraid of.
Okay.
Most of the time when people hear you speaking English, they're really impressed that you're making the effort to learn a second language.
I completely agree. I mean, just think about it from your own perspective. When was the last time that you met someone who was trying to speak your native language, maybe even struggling a little bit? What was your immediate reaction?
Yeah, I mean, my first reaction is usually, wow, that's awesome that they're trying.
Exactly.
It's more like a feeling of admiration for their willingness to kind of bridge that gap and connect. It shows respect and a desire to actually communicate. And that feeling that, being impressed by someone's effort, it's actually really common. So when you speak English, even if you make mistakes, the vast majority of people are going to appreciate that you're trying to speak with them.
For sure. So we've talked about fear of making mistakes, fear of being judged. What's another big reason why people might hesitate to speak English?
Another big one is the feeling of just not having a big enough vocabulary.
Yeah.
A lot of people think they need to know a huge amount of words before they can even begin to think about speaking comfortably. I just don't have the words to express what I want to say.
The I'll start speaking when I know enough words mindset.
Totally.
It's a trap that so many of us fall into, but let's be real. You don't need to have the entire English dictionary memorized to start having meaningful conversations. You can actually communicate really well with a fairly small set of words. We're talking maybe around 500 to 1,000 common words for everyday interactions.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Think about how many times we just use the same common phrases and words in our day-to-day lives, even in our own languages.
Yeah.
It's not about knowing every single word out there. It's about being able to use the ones you do know in a really effective way and in different contexts.
It makes me think about babies learning to talk. Like, they don't wait till they know hundreds of words before they say mama or dada.
Right,
Hi.
exactly.
They start with what they have, and they just kind of gradually build up their vocabulary through practice and just being exposed to language.
Yeah, and that's such a perfect comparison because they just jump in and start experimenting with those sounds and you understand them, even if the grammar is not quite perfect.
Exactly.
Or the vocabulary is limited.
Totally.
And the same thing is true for learning English. Waiting till you know enough, whatever enough means, can actually become a way of putting it off, and you might never start speaking, really.
Yeah, for sure. So just to kind of recap quickly, the main reasons we get that fear are the fear of making mistakes, the worry about what other people will think, and this feeling of not having enough words. But I think the big takeaway is that you don't need to be perfect to start speaking.
You got it.
You don't need to be flawless to start communicating and improving.
Exactly. And I think that leads us really well into some common beliefs that can sometimes make these fears even stronger.
Oh, yeah.
And actually prevent people from speaking.
All right, myth-busting time. What's the first big misconception we need to get rid of?
So I think a really common one is, I need to be perfect before I even start.
Yeah.
A lot of learners, they think they need to have flawless grammar, a perfect accent, all of that before they can open their mouths.
This one is so damaging because aiming for perfection right away, it's not just unrealistic, it can actually stop you from making any progress.
Right.
I mean, as we were saying, even native speakers aren't perfect.
Right.
Like, we use filler words
All the time.
all the time. We make little grammar slips. It's just a natural part of how we speak.
Yeah, it's really a natural part of how language works in general. It's something that's alive, that's always changing. And the way we speak is often less formal than the way we write. And so if you're waiting for this kind of imaginary perfect state, you might be waiting forever.
Right.
And real fluency, which is about, being able to share your ideas, share your thoughts, that comes from speaking, not from achieving some perfect ideal of grammar.
I love that. Okay. Myth number 2, what's the next one we need to address?
Okay, another really common belief is that I need a native speaker to practice with. And while it's true that practicing with someone whose first language is English can be super helpful, it's not the only way to improve. It can be pretty limiting if that's the only thing you're waiting for.
Totally agree. It's amazing if you can find native speakers to practice with, but if you don't, it's definitely not a deal breaker.
Right.
There are so many other great ways to get that speaking practice in.
For sure.
What are some of those alternatives?
Well, practicing with other English learners can be great because you're all kind of going through the same things.
Yeah.
You can support each other.
Yeah.
You might feel a bit less pressure and more comfortable making those mistakes. And there's also a lot of AI-powered chatbots that are becoming more and more advanced.
Oh, interesting.
They can be a great way to practice, in a space where you don't feel judged at all.
Okay.
And even just something simple as talking to yourself in English can be really useful.
I love that, like narrating your day as you go about it in English. I mean, it might feel a little silly at first, but it's a good way to get your mouth moving, forming those sentences. What about other things like sending voice notes or joining online language exchange groups?
Oh, those are all fantastic ideas.
Yeah.
Voice messages allow you to practice at your own pace. You can listen back, re-record, and there are online platforms that connect you with people from all over the world who are learning English. So it's really great peer-to-peer practice.
That's awesome.
And let's not forget about reading aloud.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Reading aloud in English can help you with your pronunciation, getting comfortable with the sentence structure. The key takeaway, I think, is that regular practice in some form is way more important than waiting for that perfect practice partner.
I love it. Okay, myth number 3. What's next?
So myth number 3 is I need a huge vocabulary to start speaking. And this goes back to what we were talking about before, that feeling that you don't have enough words. But the truth is, you don't need to know tons of obscure words to have a good, functional conversation.
Yeah.
Think about it. Imagine you're describing the weather. You could say, the weather is very nice today. Or you could say, the atmospheric conditions are highly conducive to outdoor activities.
Right.
They mean the same thing.
Yeah.
But the first sentence is much simpler, more natural, and totally appropriate for an everyday conversation.
Absolutely. Sometimes keeping it simple is actually more effective, and it makes you sound more natural as well. You don't have to, try to impress people with big words to get your point across.
Exactly.
Okay. Myth number 4, what's the last one?
All right, so the last one, and this can be a big one for people, is the fear that if I make mistakes, people are going to laugh at me.
Yeah.
This is a really common worry.
It's understandable to feel that way, but let me ask you, when you hear someone trying to learn your native language and they slip up, do you laugh at them?
Absolutely not.
No, right. Like we were talking about, it's more that feeling of respect. And that's how most people feel about English learners, too.
Exactly.
Most people are going to be really supportive, and they'll appreciate that you're making the effort. Making mistakes is not something to be ashamed of. It's actually a sign that you're using the language and you're trying to learn.
Absolutely. It's an important part of the process.
Totally.
If you're making mistakes, it means you're pushing yourself and you're actually speaking.
Exactly.
And that's where the real learning takes place.
I love it. So we've busted those myths.
We've done it.
You don't need to be perfect to start speaking. Just go for it. You don't need a native speaker as your only practice partner. You don't need a massive vocabulary to have a conversation. Simple words often work best.
Right.
And the fear that people will laugh at your mistakes is usually just not true.
Right.
Most people respect your effort.
Exactly. And now that we've kind of gotten rid of those things, let's talk about some actual steps you can take to start speaking English more confidently.
Yes, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. If someone is feeling those nerves, what are some practical, concrete things they can do to start moving past that?
So the first step, and it might sound obvious, is to change how you think about mistakes.
Okay.
So instead of thinking of them as these big failures, things to avoid at all costs, try to see them as opportunities to learn.
I like that a lot. It's like looking at the same thing in a totally different way.
Totally.
Instead of thinking, oh, no, I messed up, I'm no good at this, you can start to think, oh, okay, that's interesting. I see where I went wrong there. I'm going to try it differently next time.
Exactly. Remember that comparison we made to little kids learning to talk? They don't get discouraged when they mispronounce a word or use the wrong grammar. They just keep trying and keep learning.
Right.
And we can learn a lot from that. And in a really practical way, what that means is actually replacing those negative thoughts like, I'm so bad at English, with more encouraging ones like, I'm getting better every day, or I can do this.
Mm-hmm. That internal dialogue makes such a difference. Okay, step number 2 for building that confidence.
Start small.
Okay.
You don't need to jump into these big, complex conversations right away.
Right.
Begin with small, low-pressure interactions.
Okay, that makes sense. Like testing the waters. What kind of small conversations?
Yeah. Simple stuff like say hello to someone, order food or drink in English, ask for directions, even just describe what you see around you to yourself.
Okay.
The main thing is just to get comfortable with speaking. And you could even start with something as basic as one sentence a day.
Okay.
Maybe it's, how's your day going? Or, the weather's really nice today. And building from those little successes can really help your confidence grow over time.
It's kind of like exercising a muscle, right? The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Totally.
So we've got changing our mindset about mistakes and starting small. What's next?
So step 3 is to try to create a daily routine.
Okay.
Just like anything you want to get better at, consistency is key. Try to find just a little bit of time each day, even just a few minutes, to practice speaking English.
Okay, so even just a few minutes can be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
What could someone do during that little practice session?
There's lots of things you can do. You could talk about your plans for the day. You could describe what's around you.
Yeah.
You could even retell a simple story or something that happened to you. And as we mentioned before, there are apps, online groups. You could even record yourself and listen back. The main thing is just making it a habit.
Mm-hmm.
And consistency is what really matters. Short, regular practice is going to be much more effective than those long, occasional sessions.
That makes total sense. It's about making it part of your daily routine.
Exactly.
All right. What's step number 4?
Step number 4 is to really embrace the idea that it's okay not to be perfect and to focus on just getting your message across.
I think that's so important. Like, we can get so caught up in trying to say everything perfectly that we end up freezing up and not saying anything at all.
Right. And it can be helpful to think about it from the other side. If someone's speaking your native language and they make a few little grammar mistakes or their pronunciation isn't perfect,
Yeah.
can you still understand what they're trying to say?
Oh, absolutely.
Almost always, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same for English speakers listening to you.
Right.
Their main goal is to understand you, not to analyze every little grammar rule. So don't get stuck trying to find the perfect word. Just focus on conveying your idea. If you don't know a specific word, try to use simpler words that are similar, or use your hands, or just explain it in a different way. The key is to keep that conversation moving.
That takes a lot of pressure off. I love that.
Okay.
Okay, final step in our confidence building guide.
Find a safe space to practice.
Okay.
This could be a friend who's also learning English. It could be a tutor.
Mm-hmm.
It could be someone you meet in an online group. The important thing is to have a place where you feel supported, where you can make mistakes and not feel judged.
Yeah, having that supportive environment can make such a difference, right? It makes you feel comfortable taking those risks and making those mistakes because you know you're not being judged for it.
Exactly. And, if you don't have a partner to practice with, you could always join a group or a club that's focused on something you're interested in, where, the focus is on connecting with people rather than evaluating your language. And even just practicing by yourself in front of a mirror can be a really great way to get more comfortable. So the more you practice in a place where you feel comfortable, the more natural speaking English will become.
So just to recap those 5 steps, we've got change your mindset about mistakes. Start by having those small conversations. Create a daily routine. Get comfortable with being imperfect. And find a safe place to practice.
Those are great, yeah.
Those are all super actionable and helpful strategies. Now, we've talked a lot about the practical stuff, but there's something else that's kind of at the heart of all of this, and that is the power of our own minds. So let's talk about how mindset and positivity play a huge role in becoming a confident speaker.
Yeah, this is a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Your mindset, how you think about learning and speaking English, that can have such a big impact on your progress and how confident you feel.
Absolutely. Think about it for a second. When you think about having to speak English, what's that first feeling that comes up? Is it excitement because you get to communicate with someone? Or is it more nervous, worried about making a mistake?
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of learners just go straight to that place of nervousness.
Yeah.
Thinking about what could go wrong. But imagine if you could kind of flip that script, and start thinking, this is another chance for me to practice and get better. That could change everything.
Totally. It's like our mindset really does influence our confidence. If you're always saying to yourself, oh, I'm not good at English, or I'm going to mess up, that can become like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're going to feel less confident speaking.
Absolutely. And if you start to have a more positive internal conversation with yourself, say things like, hey, I'm getting better every time I try, or I can communicate even if I make mistakes.
Yeah.
You start to feel more self-assured. And it's interesting. There's actually research that shows that learners who have a more positive attitude about language learning tend to learn faster and more effectively.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's kind of going back to what we were saying about children, right? They don't have those same doubts.
Right.
They just kind of jump in and experiment, and they don't have that fear of judgment.
Exactly. So a big part of it is be more like a kid.
I love it.
Embrace the learning journey. Accept that you're going to make mistakes. That's part of it. And really focus on the joy of being able to communicate.
Okay, so how can we actively train our brains to be more positive when it comes to speaking English? What are some concrete things we can do on a daily basis?
So there are a few really great strategies. One is to practice positive self-talk.
Okay.
Consciously make an effort to replace those negative thoughts with positive ones. So instead of thinking, oh, my English is so bad, say, I'm working on improving my English every day, or I can communicate in English.
It's like retraining your inner voice to be your cheerleader instead of your critic. What's another thing we can do?
Another really good one is to celebrate your small wins.
Love that.
Take a minute to acknowledge and feel good about every new sentence you learn, every new word or phrase you understand. Every time you have a successful interaction in English, no matter how small it might seem.
Yeah.
Those little things can really build momentum and show you that you're making progress.
It's about focusing on the progress instead of dwelling on the places where you still feel like you need to get better. What's the third one?
So the third one is to surround yourself with positivity.
Okay.
This could be listening to encouraging podcasts, reading stories about other language learners who've overcome their challenges, and joining supportive communities, either online or in person. The more positive input you surround yourself with, the more it's going to affect your own mindset.
Those are all really actionable and great. Is there anything else that we can do to boost that self-belief?
Yeah, another really powerful one is visualization.
Okay.
So take some time to imagine yourself speaking confidently in different situations. Picture yourself having a great conversation, expressing your ideas clearly.